Hi guys, today we are talking about about Virginia Woolf that was born and died in the same years as Joyce. She was born in 1882 and she died in 1941 when she committed suicide. The figure of her father was an important element, an important fact in her life. He was an eminent Victorian intellectual, but he had a conventional view of the role of women. Her education was quite similar on one side to Emily Bronte's and on the other side on Mary Shelley's. To Mary Shelley's education. To Emily Bronte because she had free access to the library of her father, and it was mainly by reading those books that she got educated, and so she was a self-taught intellectual. And to Mary Shelley because of the intellectual stimulus of her family, because her father was an eminent Victorian intellectual. Another important experience in her life was her summer holidays at St. Ives in Cornwall, because the sea was very important in her life, all her life long. Because of the double meaning that water had to her. On one side, water represented what is harmonious and feminine. On the other side, it stood for the possibility of the resolution of intolerable conflicts in death. In fact, it was through water that she committed suicide in 1941. In fact, she drowned herself in the river Ouse. And water was important, was the protagonist of some of her novels, the Voyage Out, that stands for in Italian for La Crociera, and To the Lighthouse, that stands in Italian for Gita al Faro, The Waves, that was published in 1931, that stands for Le Onde. The death of her mother was another important event in her life because it provoked her first nervous breakdown. She died when Virginia Woolf was only 13. She also had the following nervous breakdowns, and she attempted at committing suicide many times. She succeeded only in 1941. And when her father died, she felt finally free because of the tyrannical role of her father. Because, as I have told you, he had a traditional view of the role of women. When her father died, she joined the Bloomsbury Group. That was an intellectual group of the time that shared a contempt for traditional morality, a rejection of artistic conventions, and the middle-class sexual codes. In 1912, she married Leonard Woolf, even though she kept an unconventional, some unconventional sexual orientations. So in spite of being married to Leonard Woolf, she had many homosexual affairs with women. And The Voyage Out is her first novel, and it was published in 1915, and it is quite a traditional and conventional novel. It was just the beginning of her experimentation, and it is the period when she also experiences for the first time the nursing home, cioè la casa di cura, because she started to have some nervous problems. She had first a nervous breakdown. And Mrs. Dalloway was published in 1925, where he starts her technical modernist experimentation. To the Lighthouse was published in 1927. Orlando is another revolutionary novel that she published in 1928. It was dedicated to one of her lovers, the intellectual Vita Sackville West, and it's completely revolutionary because the protagonist goes through different sexes and historical periods, starting from the Elizabethan age to 1928, when she has become at last a successful writer. She lives 400 years, and she is in 1928, when the story ends, is still young. So a completely new, completely revolutionary novel, where also the androgyny is experimented. The androgyny that is seen as the key to happiness, something that also T.S. Eliot would have explored. Seeing the androgyny, so the coexistence of the two sexes, as a need to have a complete perception of reality. That is, through the sensitivity of men and women, an individual could have a complete perception of reality. Another important work is the essay A Room of One's Own, that was born from 2 lectures that the writer kept at the University of Cambridge, and that became an essay. The title itself is a metaphor. A room of one's own stands for a place for a woman artist to be free, to give space to her art. So a room of one's own is a space of one's own, a space for a woman, a space that a woman hasn't ever had because of the traditional role of woman. She had always been relegated to the familiar roles. And she even reflects on a fictional sister of Shakespeare. She creates a fictional sister of Shakespeare, and she says that if Shakespeare had had a sister with the same talent as he had, she wouldn't have had the same opportunities because a woman. And as you can imagine, this work had a strong impact on the feminist movement of the 1960s and 1970s. She also reflected on the fact that great universities such as Oxford and Cambridge were relegated to men, so women were banned from this kind of culture, from this kind of universities. As I have told you, she committed suicide in 1941 at the beginning of the Second World War, where her anxiety and fears increased. And so she drowned herself in the river Ouse. She's a modernist novelist, the same as Joyce, and she gave voice to the inner world of feeling and memory. Human personality was seen as a continuous shift of impressions and emotions, and the outer events are all important because of the impressions that they arouse in the character's mind. The omniscient narrator disappears, and the point of view shifts inside the character's mind through flashbacks, associations of ideas, impressions presented as a continuous flux, as a turbulent river, come un fiume tumultuoso. His essay on modern fiction is particularly important because he reflects on how insufficient The traditional narrative techniques are to represent the stream of consciousness. She says, on an ordinary day, a mind receives a myriad of impressions, trivial, banali, evanescent, evanescenti, or engraved with sharpness of steel, quindi molto profonde, coming from all sides as a shower. So if a writer were free, there would be no plot or tragedy in the traditional style, using the traditional techniques, because life can't be defined as a series of buttons sewn by a tailor on a uniform. Quindi la vita non è come una serie di bottoni messi in fila alla stessa distanza l'uno dall'altro da un sarto, anche qui ovviamente è una metafora, or a series of gig lamps, una serie di lampioni per strada che pure sono posizionati tutti alla stessa distanza l'uno dall'altro. Life can be defined as a semi-transparent envelope, una busta semitrasparente, a luminous halo, un alone luminoso, or anyway something undefined, surrounding us from the beginning to the end, as Joyce Wolf follows the stream of consciousness. In Joyce, the characters show their thoughts by means of interior monologue, sometimes becoming incoherent and not having a syntactically orthodox way. In Woolf, the writer maintains her authorial presence, and the logical and grammatical organization of the narrative are maintained. The moments of being can be considered similar to Joyce's epiphany. They are moments of insight during the character's daily life when they can see reality behind appearance. Here is the plot of Mrs. Dalloway. The setting of Mrs. Dalloway, like for Joyce's Ulysses, the action takes place on a single day, on an ordinary day, but differently from Joyce, she doesn't elevate the characters to the level of myth by using the mythical method as Joyce had done. She deals with the changes in social life of the time, for example, the spread of newspapers, the use of cars and plays, and so on. She uses the device of the striking of Big Ben as a symbol to recall the passing of chronological external time, so it has a symbolical value. And what is important again isn't the sequence of events, but the way a specific use of time and plays hold them together. While walking up Bond Street, Vanessa also perceives, thinks, remembers, so that present experiences are mixed with the feelings and experiences of the past. So, in her mind, she goes through and fro in time and space. Clarissa is an upper-class lady of 51, is wife of Richard Dalloway, a conservative member of parliament with traditional ideas for the roles of women, and she's permanently split in two between her ex-sweetheart and the need to conform to her social class and a wish to her social class. Septimus, when the war broke out, enlisted for patriotic reasons. He's extremely sensitive man who suddenly falls prey of panic, fear, and sense of guilt for the death of his friend Evans. Evans had died in front of him, so he's a shell-shocked case, and Vanessa feels very close to Septimus. The only reason why she survives and Septimus dies is that Septimus can't distinguish between his personal response and the external world, while Vanessa never loses her awareness, la sua consapevolezza of the outside world as something external to herself. Good. That's all for today. Bye.